Hi guys, Jonge from Sharp 11 Music here, and this is a video long overdue on my thoughts on Paul Desmond's sound. As you might know, the past 2 years I've been searching for that sound, and I've tried a lot of different things, including things that have brought me to do mouthpiece reviews. It started, I think, with the Jody Jazz HR Custom, and I've done several other brands. I've also started testing how to play in a live band the Paul Desmond music in different settings, and more recently I got myself a quite similar saxophone, a vintage super balanced action, which needed a complete overhaul and which I documented as well for you to see how that works. The point of this video is that when going in for looking for that Desmond sound, I had some assumptions, and some of them stayed roughly, but some others I really needed to adapt, and I might have a quite controversial take on how I perceive his sound at the moment. So I want to actually give you a heads up on where my stance is on Paul Desmond's sound, and I'll do that by sharing 5 of the biggest lessons, for me at least, to adapt to a Paul Desmond sweet, soft, lyrical sound. The first of them is what I call the loudness war. You might have heard of it in terms of pop music and mastering of audio. That's kind of where the term is borrowed from, but it's kind of the same thing with jazz. Newsflash, most of jazz bands are pretty loud. It starts with the drummer. Mostly it's kind of a hard bop way if you go to a general, let's say, jam session, and there's a certain level of loudness already there. And that's why I don't think you see a lot of the Desmond type of alto sounds on jam sessions in general, is because it's kind of hard to get to if you have to play loud. Playing soft is really essential. Let me give you the example of my live sessions, which are on YouTube, which you can watch. We played, for example, Desmond's version of A Taste of Honey. It just clicked perfectly. Certainly at the start it's only guitar, saxophone. I could play really soft, and then I felt really comfortable with the sound. Which also brings me to the fact that I'm the most happy with Morgan's version of a Paul Desmond sounding mouthpiece, which is the Dry Martini, made by Eric Greifenhagen, and it has been such a joy to play on that since I think 1.5 years I'm playing it now. The thing with that mouthpiece is, rightfully so, that it's a small tip opening that they come with. I was playing the 5 in this clip I showed you earlier, tip opening 5. I even got recently a tip opening 4, and that one is, yeah, I think the one that comes closest. So in terms of gear, it's basically just a very small tip opening. 4 is also what Desmond used with the Gregory mouthpiece, a stiff reed, a quite hard reed, and probably you want to have one of the more vintage type of saxophones before the Mark VI, which was a pivotal different type of saxophone, and which I recently acquired, which I mentioned already, the Selmer Super Balanced Action. That's what Desmond used as well. So to reiterate, I love the mouthpiece. I love playing it here in my room. I love playing it with the band when it's the right music, when it's really not so loud, only in the very kind of loud circumstances. That's the only place where I feel like it has its limit. But you know, that's okay. I don't think Paul Desmond really played loud or liked to play loud, and that's a part of the strength of his sound, which also brings with it that you can hear the air in his sound, which is an important part as well. Consider the part that air takes in a saxophone sound. Some people that play loud and have brighter sounds, there you don't hear so much of the air being recorded, but if it's a little bit more in the medium, like mezzo forte or the piano, like also Ben Webster, for example, he played of course also Subtone, that's something we come to later, but then you hear a lot of air in the sound. Air is a very important part of a saxophone sound. Also, how the air is sounding. Is it like high fuzzy? Is it a bit lower fuzzy? You can work with even the sound of air. So to go deep, and you can hear it very clearly also on the Time Out album, you hear Desmond's air being a nice part of the sound. Literally a warm breeze of soft sound. Which brings me to my second thought, and that will be probably the most controversial. So I'm happy to hear your thoughts on it in the comment section. That would be great, but I've come to adjust a little bit my concept of what Desmond's sound is. First, I thought it was super dark and lyrical and beautiful and everything you want, and it's still lyrical and beautiful, but I don't think it's necessarily super dark or as dark as I used to think. I've tried to do some experiments where I really tried to sound match Desmond's sound, and I ended up always being slightly darker than Desmond, weirdly enough. And that brought me to, also look at, when you're recording, to equalizers and look what equalizers tell about the frequencies apparent in Desmond's sound, and then you actually see that, yes, he has like a high cutoff for people who are familiar with equalizers and DAWs. So there's not a lot of high on it, but there is also not so much low on it. It's pretty much a sculpted, more compact sound than I thought at first. So it's kind of mid-rangey. In the mid-high range, you have even, I think, at times, and it differs between different recordings. I mean, also Desmond kind of sounded different in different aspects of his career. That's something for later. But there was, bright is maybe too much of a word, but there's that sparkle in his sound as well that you can't overlook. So just trying to sound really dark and breezy doesn't really get you to the Desmond sound. Which brings me to a next realization. Paul Desmond didn't play so subtone. What you usually would do if you wanted to sound softer and warmer on a saxophone. You play with a looser lower lip, and that brings out a little bit more of the lower frequencies. Paul Desmond actually didn't do that. As I just stated, you don't see a lot of low in his sound. You see a lot of mid and lower mid, upper mid, and also not so much high. So it's really a compact sound. You could say even thin sound, which I don't think is true, but it's not trying to make every frequency sound that is possible on a saxophone. That's just what I'm trying to tell. And certainly not with a special focus on only the lower frequencies there. Actually, one of the most firm embouchures that I know of in jazz that Desmond has. You have some terrific footage on several recordings, and you can even see the dimples in his cheeks because of, quite tight muscles around the mouth there. And if you compare it to, let's say, a Phil Woods, who was kind of more extreme to the other side, Phil Woods could sound quite more edgy, with a way more loose embouchure, and Paul Desmond sounded really soft and easygoing with a more firm embouchure. Almost classical, I would say at times, if you look at it. For sure, within the jazz world, that's like the most classical embouchure I've seen, and that probably comes from when he was around 12 years. He picked up the clarinet at first, and he studied that, and the kind of embouchure you see him have really makes you think of like a clarinet player. And then probably afterwards he loosened that up to the standards of real classical playing, but it's still a firm embouchure. Then I think you kind of have to notice that there are roughly 3 different parts of Desmond's sound and how it developed throughout his life. So the early 50s, you know, the early days of the Dave Brubeck Quartet, and you have those iconic albums like Live at Oberlin and the college campuses and stuff like that. I think Desmond sounded, for his sound, bright and pretty out there, so to speak. It sounds a little bit more focused, as opposite to the more end of 50s recording, 60s recording. Also has to do, of course, with mic choice and the type of studios they were in. You can also hear differences in that, but that's, you know, that's a complete different thing. But there you hear that warm Desmond sound like we know it from Take 5, which is so iconic, and I think that's the sound where most people refer to as the typical Desmond sound. That's like end 50s and 60s for sure. Then at the end of the 60s, towards the 70s, he got his little half retirement where he only would record because of he had this record deal, but he actually quit saxophone playing besides that and wanted to become a writer for 2 to 3 years. And after that, you can hear his sound, I think, suffered a bit. It's a little bit less steady, a little bit less air control, certainly towards the end of some of the notes. Probably also due to he wasn't the most healthy person ever. That's an understatement, by the way. And at the end of his life, if you listen to the recordings with Chet Baker, for example, there you can hear the air control is kind of weak, which is very natural because he was dying from lung cancer at that point, of course. But you can hear that in his sound. Okay, I think I've done more than 4 or 5 points already, but I've come to the last point, and that's an important one. You shouldn't underestimate how much phrasing and articulation contributes to what we perceive as somebody's sound. That doesn't count only for Paul Desmond, that counts for every saxophonist I know. If you just would cut off the start and the end, it would be way harder to recognize and pinpoint somebody's sound. There, like the mere timbre of it, it's way harder. Every saxophonist has their own kind of specifics in how they will just scoop a note a little bit or play it dead on, or there's a little bit of air before the note enters, not to speak of the tail end of the note, what happens there. And Desmond has his specifics also with vibrato. He's loose with it. Okay, I'm really going fast through all these important parts of his sound, but a very good video I've seen here on YouTube is from the German player Lawrence Hargasner, if I pronounce that correctly, I hope so. It's great, where he talks about Desmond actually playing a lot of the times when he starts a note, he doesn't use a tongue at all. It's really from air support, and like a flute player actually would do, without any tongue. There is like f, and then, you know, you come straight from the air, and there is no more subtle way to start a note than that. I think you can hear that type of starting his note very well in this A Taste of Honey recording by Desmond, for example. But that's not the only thing that he does. At times he uses a lot of tongue, at times he actually even uses quite some bebop phrasing, with half-tonguing, making the offbeat pop out, so he half-tongues the downbeat. At other times he also uses quite a lot of attack on every note with his tongue. It's kind of pretty intense, but with that sweet sound you barely notice. I mean, it stays a sweet sound somehow, but he is at times very articulate, very attacking the notes, every single one of them, and swinging hard. So to summarize, this was a lot of information. I hope it makes somehow sense, but I just wanted to, it's all in my head for a long time, and I don't have often time to make videos anymore. This is the spring break, so I have a little bit more time just this week. So I wanted to really pump it out to you guys to think about and to get back to me. But to summarize, I think you should play soft and you should think of your gear as a small tip opening mouthpiece, preferably probably a 4 or a 5. Can be a Meyer, can be a standard jazz mouthpiece, but I really love that Morgan mouthpiece, and they're not paying me to say that, by the way, but I just love that product and how it's made. It's really brought me a lot of joy. A stiff reed on top of that small tip opening, and then one of the saxophones made before the Mark 6, because you know there is like the Mark 6 and everything that came after it kind of was based on that blueprint, and everything before, I mean, has a softer type of sound and actually sculpts the sound already more into, it's like having this vintage preset equalizer, which you might do after recording in your DAW. That's kind of what like this Selmer super balanced action already provides, but then in real life. Next, play with not too much subtone. Get a fairly tight embouchure, not too tight, don't make it like a classical embouchure, but it's a little bit more tight. And the phrasing of Desmond is like so neat and so meticulous, and it deserves its own attention. I mean, he's so well known for his beautiful sound and for his incredible improvisations, but that phrasing makes a lot of the sound and the melodies sound good, and it's very sophisticated, and that's also a part where he sets himself apart from the other players. That's why he sounds so unique, the sound, but also the phrasing and the articulation that goes with that sound. I hope that makes sense. I don't know if this video will turn out well, but let me know if that has some value for you, if that's some food for thought. I hope so. You can disagree with me, but that's just my 2 cents on it by, you know, diving into it now for almost 2 years, as much as I can. You know, when I'm practicing, I'm doing the Desmond thing. When I'm gigging, I need to do some other things, but frankly, some people have told me that they hear some difference in my playing, so that's actually a nice thing to hear. Maybe they just think, man, you sound so much worse even. No, it's for the better, I think, and it's a fun journey to take. Let me know and see you in the next video.